The year I turned 20 was a time in my life where I really learned a lot about myself, and probably the scariest part of my life as well. The part of my life where I felt the most disconnected from anybody and anything. It was around the time when COVID was kind of settling out and people were starting to stop worrying about it, but there was obviously still weird people about it. Like, like you'd go out amongst people and people just avoided you. Like, people still weren't fully used to getting back into talking to one another and sitting next to each other on a bus, or there was like this awkward disconnection from people. During this time is probably the most I've ever felt alone. I was single at the time. I just got over about 2 failed relationships, and this is before I finally got settled into a relationship that I'm now in today. I was living out on my own for one of the first times in my life. I'd only been on my own for about a few months. I was working the same dead end manual labor job. It was a pretty dark time for me, and I was super unsure of what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And the fact that I was trying to figure it all out on my own just made it feel scary. And, a lot of people go through that kind of stuff, but for me, it was all new. I was at a school for about 2 years, and everything just felt like it was moving too fast. And it didn't help that I had no friends at the time. Not that I didn't have friends at all, it was just all my friends had gone off to college or university. I get the odd weekend where I could go out with them, hang out, and, try to make connections with other people, talk to girls, or just go out and drink and have a good time, but, that never filled the void, and that only happened about once in a blue moon. So all in all, it was quite a lonely time, which is what I'm trying to get at. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is that loneliness in your 20s doesn't always look like what people think it does. It's definitely not what I thought it was back when I was in high school, and it definitely surprised me, and I really learned what it really is. And I definitely learned what it was that period of my life. It's not always sitting alone in your room with no one to call. Sometimes it's being out with people and still feeling disconnected, laughing in a group but not feeling understood, talking to somebody every day and still feeling unseen. Just because you have friends doesn't mean you're not alone. And I felt that the most at this time in my life. These friends that I would hang out with, they had completely different lives than I did. I was working and stressing about bills, but they had a scholarship they were riding off of and going to school. The only bills they had to worry about was paying off their bar tab at the end of the night and maybe picking up something different from maybe having something delivered from Uber Eats. It was two different lifestyles, and I was very jealous and very angry with myself at the time, I remember. But that wasn't right, and I never did take that anger out, and I always kept it tucked inside. I mean, who am I supposed to be mad at? My friends for being, successful in school and going on and doing something? It was my own decision not to go to school, so all I could blame was myself. See, this is the kind of loneliness that surprised me, and I had this anger in me about it, especially towards my friends that I had to keep bundled inside. Because I used to think, it was just strange because I used to think loneliness meant something was wrong with my social life. But then now having that experience, I realized it usually meant something was misaligned internally. There was a stretch in my 20s where I filled every quiet moment if I wasn't in a relationship. I was talking to someone new. If I wasn't with friends, I had headphones in. If my phone was buzzing, I felt off. I had this weird thing where I wasn't used to the silence after school and being on my own, that silence felt very uncomfortable, so I had to fill it. If I didn't get my friends to hang out on the weekend, I was out looking for somebody, whether it be a hookup with somebody or just meeting new friends on the streets and just trying to connect with somebody, anybody, or even if I was home alone, listening to music and just trying to avoid the silence because it killed me. I at the time just didn't know how to grow with it. I didn't know how to get used to it, and it just bothered me. It's a really weird feeling to try to explain, and I don't understand why. And you try to look into it. You try to become a bit of a Google doctor, WebMD. Psychologists will say humans are wired for connection, which makes sense, but what they don't emphasize enough is that we're also wired for self-reflection. And when you avoid being alone, you avoid hearing your own thoughts clearly. And it makes sense because that's something I was never really good at. I was never good at self-reflection. I was more of a go with the flow kind of person. And I had a pretty busy childhood, so like going throughout school, there was never barely ever time to self-reflect. The odd time I would reflect about something, especially if I did something wrong and I know I did something wrong, but that's kind of different. I wasn't ever alone, right? I had family to fill in the gaps. So I avoided that for a while. The whole self-reflection thing seemed kind of dumb to me, I guess. Because when things got quiet, questions came up. Questions that seemed a little too deep for me at the time. But they were perfectly good questions to ask somebody, right? As old as I was, am I actually happy where I am? I know a question that often came up that I didn't like thinking about was, should I be moving back home? I'm fortunate enough that my family was pretty supportive of me, but they would let me, they would have took me back in a heartbeat. I know it, but it's just, I had this feeling that if I went back home, was I a failure? Other people did it. Other people made it out on their own. Other people don't have an option when they go out on their own. So why can't I do it? And then I'd ask myself, do I even like who I am right now? Am I becoming someone different from these lifestyle choices that I chose? And then obviously the questions of like, why do I need constant reinsurance? And this loneliness forced those questions, and I had to keep asking myself. And they're great questions to ask, but it just made me feel so uncomfortable, and I didn't have an answer for them. So of course, if I didn't have an answer, I just wanted to avoid them at all costs. Something that I understand a bit better now that I didn't back then was that being alone and feeling lonely is that there's a difference between being alone and feeling lonely. But when you're young, they kind of blur together and you don't see the fine line between them. I remember a weekend where all my usual plans fell through. No one was available, no distractions, just me. At first, I felt rejected. I felt restless because it was my first weekend that I didn't have a shit ton of. I didn't have to work overtime. I didn't have work to do. I had nothing. There was no goals I was working towards. I had no projects to work on. My car was working fine, so I had nothing to do there. So then it was weirdly calm. I went for a walk without my headphones, and that sounds small, but it was the first time in a long time I wasn't trying to fill space with something, like fun or chaotic. I was just doing something simple. I was just doing something simple and peaceful. And then it kind of hit me. I truly wasn't afraid of being alone, even though I could convince myself I was. I was afraid of not knowing myself without other people. There's a quote. I'm big into motivation and reading stuff online and swiping through reels, even though I try my best not to do it as much. So I often see quotes and I see videos. But there's a quote from a guy named Carl Jung that says loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. Loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being able to communicate the things that seem important to you. And that sticks with me because it hits me kind of hard. Because sometimes loneliness wasn't about numbers, it was about depth. At this point in my life, I chased attention so bad, thinking it would cure my loneliness. Going out and drinking with my friends, and it was expensive too, like going out and partying and trying to chase the attention of other women, just trying to build build a false connection with people. And I didn't realize I was building a connection in the wrong ways, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. A lot of those long nights and times I've went out, I've made, I've got to know some decent people. But, I mean, I wasn't building a true connection with them. Realistically, we're using each other for short-term satisfaction, right? But when I'm chasing these false cures to loneliness and when craving that attention from others, it usually led down a bad path of these loud and exciting moments, but they were bad habits and getting myself in trouble and doing stuff that just was temporary satisfaction for myself. Like none of it ever gave me any long-term gratification. And I never built no long-term connections with anybody. Any of the women I was with or any of the new friends that I made. And even the old friends I had, it never deepened our connection. It was just something to catch up with and then, well, see you next time. Even the new friends I made, there was tons of them that I've talked to and never talked to outside of partying or out drinking and smoking. There was nothing more than that. There was a wall and there it was. There was no outside life. There was no, let's go for a drive and hang out. There was no, I'm going to call you, right? It's like, that was what the friendship was. And they're not exactly great relationships to have, right? Especially when those are the only ones you focus on. And those are the ones that I seek the attention from the most. I mean, and even to this day, I have friendships with people like that, but I also have friendships with people that I truly trust and count on, and people that I can call and that I know are there for me. But you got to have, the friendships that you choose to rely on, and not just ones that you're forced to rely on because that's all you have and they're not the best for you, right? There's got to be a balance there. And sitting here now and reflecting on this past, I've realized that if you can't sit with yourself, you'll probably end up choosing the wrong people just to avoid the silence. And this was totally relatable for me. I chose the wrong people all the time. Every time it was the wrong people, just to avoid the silence. I've done that. Stayed in conversations I didn't enjoy and accepted half effort. Confused familiarity with comfort. Like it just didn't make sense, but I was doing it anyway. But as time went on and I made more time to go for those quiet walks, those quiet, simple, relaxing walks, and to sit alone, the more selective I became. I started to cut off those bad relationships. I cut off the bad habits that put me in situations where I was making even more bad relationships with women or other guys. When you build a relationship with yourself, you stop inviting people into your life who disrupt your peace. And that's when I started to truly figure shit out for myself. Stress started to be a little more, I started having a lot less stress when I started figuring myself out. I started to have a little bit more inner peace, if that makes sense. And it made me realize that growth truly is lonely. It's sometimes you got to go down a lonely path to really figure yourself out. And I'm really thankful for this time, although it was really shitty and I was really, really honestly just down a bad place at the time. And I'm glad I didn't make too many crazy bad decisions. And I did what I did. Because I know it definitely could be a lot worse. And other people get in the situation that I was in and make even further worse decisions. And I want to just make a side note. I claim that growth is lonely, but you can grow with somebody as well. I'm in a relationship now that we grow off each other. We fit perfectly. We fit pretty well with each other. And it's not always like that. I'm not in a perfect relationship, as no one is. But it is possible to grow with somebody and have somebody that you challenge each other and you grow with one another. But that being said, if I never truly found myself in this past where I was actually for real lonely and really found myself and learned these lessons, I don't know how much growing and how great of a relationship I would be in today. So I just wanted to make that a side note on how important this part of my life was. And if you're going through something like this, even though it might be hard, I want you to realize the life lessons that you get from it will change your life forever, and I hope for the better. Back to the topic of growth being lonely is when you start setting boundaries and you stop entertaining things you used to accept, when you choose self-respect over validation from others, your circle can get smaller, but smaller doesn't mean worse. People with fewer but deeper connections report higher life satisfaction. Apparently that's a thing. I never would have realized that, but I do now. I mean, there's actual research showing that people with fewer but deeper connections are more satisfied with their friend groups than those with large but shallow networks. It's a quality over quantity thing. That saying, I guess, is used for all sorts of different aspects of life. It's not just a cliche, it's psychological reality. In my 20s, loneliness stopped being something I ran from. It became something I learned from. And I hope that everyone that's going through something similar can learn from it as well. It showed me that I was avoiding what I actually valued, what I needed to heal, and what I needed to heal before bringing someone else and other people into my life. And for now, I try not to panic when things get quiet. I don't panic as much as I used to. I don't stress as much. I try to find inner peace. As corny as that sounds, I pay attention to the people that I let around me and the people I make time for. Not because my own time's because loneliness isn't a sign that you're missing something. It's more of the way I look at it, it's a sign of you're finally making space for the right things. I think honestly, if it wasn't for this lonely lesson I learned growing up, I I would never be able to develop this level of emotional maturity that I have today. Everyone matures in different stages of their life, and I feel like this gave me a big step up. It really made me find myself and have a different outlook on my friends and other people and relationships in general. I just want to say, if you have a similar situation or something you'd like to share in the comments, feel free. I'd love to discuss it with you guys. I'd love to discuss the topic more in further videos if you'd like. I want to thank you for watching, and I appreciate you for checking out. And if you feel like it, leave a like and subscribe. Thank you.